All right, so in the last lesson, we implemented the delete capability, and so that just leaves one more basic bit of functionality to complete out our CRUD operations, and that is the ability to update. Okay, so let's just jump right in here and get this done. Now, there are a lot of ways that you could go about implementing any of these operations that we've been doing, and I don't want you to have the impression that the way that I'm showing you here is the only way. We could have done it in a lot of different ways. And along those lines, when we implement the edit and update capability here, this is one that I don't know that what I'm going to show you is the way that I would really do this if I were willing to spend more time on it, but I'm trying to weigh the expediency of just showing you an overview of how you can do basic CRUD applications in the UI without having to introduce 15 million additional technologies, which I'm already hitting you with Thymeleaf for the view templating and Spring MVC and the controller and HTML and Bootstrap, and that's a lot already. And so I kind of drew the line at having to also introduce you to JavaScript, although some of you may already know JavaScript, but I want to try to avoid that for now at least. So that decision is coloring how I am going about implementing a lot of this functionality, just so you know. Okay, so having said all of that, what I'm envisioning here is in order to implement the ability to edit, I think I want to reuse some of the functionality that's already here, namely the checkboxes here. So what I'm envisioning is that if you wanted to edit one of these records, you would select it, and then we will add an additional button down here, so like an action button for edit, okay? So you would select a row, click the edit button, and then that would bring up all the details for that particular record down here. And then you could make changes to it and then save. Okay, that's what I'm envisioning. Now, that's not ideal or perfect. If any of you happen to be UI UX experts, UI stands for user interface, UX stands for user experience. So there are people who are experts at user experience who kind of study what is the best way to implement functionality in a page so that users will find it intuitive to do. And some UI UX experts might not like the fact that I'm going to use checkboxes, which technically allow you to select multiple items to be used for selecting edit, because obviously when we're editing, we're not editing multiple records at the same time. Typically, we're really just editing one at a time, though I can think of a reason why you might want to do that. But typically you'd be doing one at a time. And so it could be argued that using checkboxes to select one first and then having to click edit, it may not be the greatest usability. And I wouldn't even disagree with that. But again, I'm just trying to keep things sort of simple and piggyback off of what we've already done before. Okay, so, all right, so let's jump in here. So I think the first thing I want to do is add an additional button. So let's jump over to the template here and let's find our existing delete button. And I think what I want to start off doing is just copying that. So I'm going to duplicate that, like so. And I think I want delete to be the last button because that's a dangerous button. So maybe we want to keep that out of the way, which is why I made it red. So I'm going to pick this first one here and let's change its name to edit. And we'll leave the true there. And now we'll change this. So this style right here, this class, is what is controlling the color and decoration of the button. So it's button danger. So if we jump over here to our list of button options here, I think maybe just using the primary for this edit button might be okay, perhaps. So that is BTN primary. In fact, I can just select that and copy it and then come over here. Whoops, I didn't mean to overwrite that, but paste that right there. Okay. And so then if we jump back over here, and then we'll change the actual text on this to edit, and let's refresh the page. Okay, cool. So yeah, now we've got an edit button and a delete button. I wouldn't mind having a little more space between these two. And we should be able to do that with something like a, let's see, margin end, because it's the right end, or you've got like the beginning, which is the left, and then you've got the right side of the button, which is considered the end. So ME for end, and then maybe we'll use a number of 2 here, okay? And let's refresh and see how that looks. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, so we've got our edit button now. And you remember that the name and value bits here are only being utilized so that back in the controller, we can differentiate which button was actually pressed. That's what those are going to be used for, okay? So let's jump over to the controller now and see what we need to do here. Now, I think what we're pretty much going to be doing is almost exactly what we did in delete, so much so that maybe we can start off by just copying this, the delete method, and paste that there, and then just start making some changes. So first thing maybe is to change the method name. So this will be for editing, and I guess we can just simplistically call it edit person. All right, and then we'll want to change this value here to edit, so that way this method only gets called if the edit button was pressed. And we're still going to receive our selections because we're reusing the checkboxes there. And we even probably want this conditional still. And so now what's the thing that we might want to do differently though? I think what we'll want to do differently here is that when someone selects one of these checkboxes and clicks edit, maybe we want to go out to the database and just retrieve the first selection. So if they happen to have selected multiple checkboxes, maybe we're going to ignore all but the very first one, first of all. Maybe that's just how we're going to make this work. And we're going to go out to the database and retrieve the very first record that was selected. And then what we can do you remember how we were making it so that data was showing up in this form down here? Do you remember how we were doing that? Let's see here. So in the controller here, you may recall that we've got this method here, getPerson, which is automatically being bound to the model with a name of all lowercase person, okay? So that's kind of like the default behavior. Whenever we have this form, you get a new empty person, okay? So you get empty fields here, okay? So any person object that we bind to the model with the name person, all lowercase, will show up here. And so that means that if we want to just have all of these fields show up down here when someone clicks edit, all we really need to do is just grab that person from the database, put them into the model, and then return back to this page, and then all of those fields will already be there, okay? Does that make sense? So that's what we're going to do. So first thing, let's go ahead and grab the selected person from the database. And so we should be able to do that by simply doing a, let's see, find by ID. Okay, so there's our find by ID, and now we need to get their ID, the actual ID of the first selection, okay? Now this selections object here, remember, is an optional. So this .get that we're doing right here is simply taking the list out of the optional, okay? So this would result in a list of longs, all right? And then from there, we could do another get, but now this is calling get on the list, okay? And then if we want the first item in that list, that would just be 0. Okay, so that might look a little confusing. So here's an optional, here's a list, here's the first item in the list, okay, which would be the long 0. And then we're saying go find the person with whatever that ID is. In this case, it would be 1 if that was the checkbox that we had selected, okay? And so this method would return with a person object. And then we can capture that person object like so. Now notice it's actually returning an optional of a person because it's possible that the ID that we passed in is not a legitimate ID. And so they're giving us back an optional of a person, okay? And then we can simply bind that person to the model. Now we don't have access to the model here yet, but we can get that really easily if we simply refer to the model like so. And this is how we actually started off with our very first I think it was the save method. So I'm going to import this. Okay, so we were letting Spring MVC call our handler method, and Spring MVC will see that we have a parameter of type model, and so Spring MVC will pass the model, which is what it maintains anyway. It'll pass that into this method. And then from here, we can call model.addAttribute, and then we'll set that attribute to person, and then pass in the person, like so. Now, the last thing we want to do, though, is we don't actually want to do this redirect here. Okay, we don't want that, because if we do this redirect, we'd actually lose the person that we are binding to the model. And let me make sure you understand why that is. When we do a redirect, we are giving a command to the browser to perform a GET request on the people resource, okay? And so what that would result in is the browser will make a GET request to /people, which would ultimately result in the browser calling the show people page, okay? Now, everything that is getting bound to the model from these two model attribute methods here, that would all still happen. But this person that we're binding to the model down here, when we click the edit button, that would get lost. Okay, so we don't actually want to do a redirect in this particular case. We just want to return back to this page with the model intact. Okay. So we don't want to redirect in this particular case. And let me just remind you now, the only point of this is to populate this form with whatever person we selected, okay? And then when we click save, that's just going to go back to our existing save method, okay? So that save is going to do what it has already been doing, all right? So that's the point of this. All right, so let's refresh everything and see where we are so far. Okay, so let's select this second person here and click edit and see. Okay, so yeah, that looks like it works. We got person 2, Smith. Now we've got that problem with the date field, and I do know what the solution is, and we are going to have to actually implement something there. I was hoping to avoid it, but now that we're doing edit, I can't avoid it any longer, but it's kind of easy to solve. All right. And then there's the address. Now notice we're not seeing the address up here because of the responsive trickery that we implemented earlier. So if I pull this out though, then we'll see that person's email address, P2 Smith, right? So there's that. All right. And then there's the amount of money. So now let's see what happens though if we make a change in here. Okay, so let's change his salary to something else. So let's do like $9,000. Okay, let's see what happens here. Click return or hit return. By the way, hitting return, that will trigger the save person button action. Okay, since this form is currently active, hitting enter causes this form to submit itself. Okay, that's how that works. Oh, okay. And our validation tripped us up because I didn't re-enter a birth date. All right. So I will use the same birth date that's already there for now. And so this is another reason why we really have to make sure that we do fix that, and we will in just shortly here. All right. So return. Ooh, look at that. So it didn't update. It actually made a copy of that person. And now we've got the same guy essentially with the same first and last name and date of birth and all of that. And the only thing that's different is the salary. So why did that happen? Do you want to take a guess? Okay, so here's what happened. When we selected person 2 Smith with ID of 2 and clicked edit, we retrieved that person object from the database and we added him to the model. And then we came back to this page and filled out this form. Okay, so that all worked perfectly well. And then we clicked save, which resulted in coming down to the save person method with this person filled in. However, and this is key, this person object that got sent back from this form did not have an ID. And the reason it didn't have an ID is because we don't have an ID field here. So we're not capturing the ID. So in other words, when we selected this guy for edit and we clicked the edit button, and then we populated this form, we lost his ID because we're not tracking his ID down here. So this person that got posted back into the controller here had all of these fields filled out, but the ID was null. And with Spring Data /JPA/Hibernate, when an entity, and an entity is just an object that is meant to be used with the database essentially, when an entity doesn't have an ID or an ID is null, by default, that tells Hibernate to go ahead and just save that entity brand new, okay? However, if the entity has an existing ID already, then Hibernate understands that it should not create a new record. It should not perform an insert, but instead it should perform an update. So Hibernate is smart enough to understand that depending on that primary key field there or that ID property, that helps it to know whether or not it's doing an insert in SQL or an update, okay? And so the key to fixing this little issue here is that we actually need the ID. Now here's the problem though. We don't want our users to be able to edit that ID, because if they change that ID, that is the same thing essentially as just creating a brand new record, or it could be even worse. You might be overwriting other records that already exist in the database. So you don't want that. So we need to capture that ID when we're populating this form so that it can be sent back when we're posting / saving the person, but we don't want that ID to be editable, okay? Does that make sense? So luckily, HTML has a great solution for exactly this type of issue. So let's jump over to our form. All right, so here's our form, and here are all of our fields, right? So there's the first name, last name, date of birth, email, salary, etc., etc. So luckily, what we can do here is we can introduce another input field for the ID. However, we can make it what they call hidden. We can make it hidden. And that will allow us to capture the data, but not show it or make it editable anywhere on the screen, okay? So that's an easy way that we can solve this particular issue. So what we will do here is I'm simply going to introduce this field just like this. The type will be hidden, like so. So that'll just tell the browser, don't even display this field. It's just kind of behind the scenes to hold on to that ID, okay? And for that reason, I'm not wrapping it in divs with labels and all that stuff either, because these divs and labels and stuff are really here for cosmetic purposes to specify the layout of this field, right? But we don't even want this field to be visible, and therefore we don't need the divs and all of that stuff either. We just need this field to just be behind the scenes somewhere, hidden, literally hidden, okay? So we need that. We won't need the class because, again, class definitions are for styling and making things look a certain way, and we don't need any of that either, okay? And so then the next thing that we don't even need this ID field here, which, by the way, is mostly here actually just to make the editor happy, really, because this th::field attribute from Thymeleaf will actually result in the regeneration of an ID anyway, okay? So we will do th::field equals star ID, like so. And we don't need the error class either because, again, that's for cosmetic purposes when you have an error. So we won't need that. So I think this is all we need. All right. So let's refresh the page. Okay. So there's that. And let's delete this erroneously added record. So we'll delete that. Okay, so that's gone. And now let's select that record again, the second one with 4,500 salary for edit. All right, there we go. So let's look behind the scenes of this HTML page now. So we can do that. So we can do that in a couple of ways. I can open up the Dev Tools and go to Elements. And I could just kind of search like maybe the edit button here because I know that I added that hidden field somewhere. And if I scroll down here to the bottom, I could select this little button here, and that button allows me to zoom in on elements on the page. So if I click that, and now it's kind of primed. And then I select somewhere where I know close to where that hidden field should be, like this last button here. I'm going to select that. And then what happens now is that this elements area here zooms in on the HTML for that button right there, okay? And then right above it though is my hidden field with ID of ID and name of ID and value of 2, okay? So, and I probably should have shown you this before, but just to make it clear, so this th: field is no longer showing up here because it kind of did its job and then it got itself out of the way, okay? So this th field became an ID equals ID attribute and a name equals ID and a value. This one field rendered all 3 of those attributes, and then it removed itself from the final version of the HTML. And that's why Thymeleaf is called a templating engine, okay? These are template commands that will result in other HTML being rendered to the browser, okay? All right, so now we've got that number 2, which is what we needed there, okay? And so now if I change this salary to 9,000, like so, oh, and I got to set this date of birth again. We'll fix that right next. 4/4, I don't remember what I had there before, but that's fine. And then hit return. Well, let me close down the dev tools now, okay? And then I will hit return. Look at that. Now we've still got only 2 records, and the second record now has a salary of 9,000, okay? So we just needed to capture that ID value and then pass it back to the controller when we are saving those changes so that Hibernate would know this isn't a new person with a null ID. This is an existing person with an existing ID, and therefore we're just doing an update in the database. And you know what? I wish I had remembered to keep our eye on the Hibernate, but actually here it is. In fact, yeah, you can see it right here. So there's the update that was just executed for us. That's it. And then we did a redirect back to the main page again, where Hibernate then selected all of the people to repopulate this table. Okay, so there you can see what's actually happening. All right, so now what to do about the dates? Well, the issue here, the reason why this date field never populates properly is because of our formatters. All right, so let me remind you of the formatter that we implemented. We have a formatter here for local dates, right? Right there. Specifically the print method of this formatter. So we decided to customize the display of our local dates so that we would have this nice month written out, followed by a 2-digit day and then the year up here in the table, all right? And what's happening though is when we change the text format of a date to this format, the browser no longer knows how to parse this so that it can display the date properly. And that's what's happening here. So unfortunately, if we want this guy to work, as far as I know, at least as far as I know, if we want this guy to work, we need to put the date format back into this ISO local date format. That's what's needed, okay? So here's what we're gonna do. We will go ahead and change this to use the ISO local date. And in fact, if I recall correctly, I don't even know that we would even need the date time formatter anymore because I think the ISO local date was the default that we were getting anyway. Let's try that real quick, actually. Let me confirm that. So I'm just going to comment out the component there so that this formatter won't get picked up by Spring anymore, and therefore there will be no automated formatting of local dates. Okay, so I'm just getting rid of that. And then I'm going to restart or refresh. All right, so there are the dates that we're getting now. So that's the format that we're getting. And let's just see what we get if I say to edit one of these fields now. Okay, so yeah, that actually still doesn't work. That's not the format that it needed to be. Yeah, so we do need the ISO local date. Okay, so I just wanted to test that out real quick. All right, so we will re-enable this formatter. And then what we will do is instead of using this custom pattern here, like we will replace that with ISO local date, like so. And that means now that I can just refer to this date time formatter instance here. And that is also the instance that we're already referring to down here, okay? So remember, this print method is where we take our dates that are in our person, in this case, and then we convert them into a string for display purposes. And then this parse method is where we go from posting a date to then getting it back into the person class, okay? The instance of the person class. All right, so let's refresh again. All right, yeah, so there we go. So now the default format is 4-digit year and then the month and then the day. And now look at that. Now the date of birth field here populates properly. So this guy wasn't happy. However, now, I don't like that. I want my dates the way that I want them, okay? The way that we started off with all of this. So how can I get around this issue? Well, I did mention this before, but I didn't show it before, and now I will. We actually can format these dates using another technique, and that is using Thymeleaf itself, okay? So if we jump back over to our template now, and let me close down that console stuff there, and we find our table up here at the top, and we go to this date of birth field here, right? So we actually can just format this date of birth using functions that are provided by Thymeleaf. However, it's going to be a little bit involved in what we have to do. So let me take you down the road so that you'll understand first off. So we'll jump back over to the Thymeleaf documentation here, and we will go to the generic documentation, not the one for Spring, because what we're about to do now with formatting a date has nothing specifically to do with Spring right now. All right, so we'll jump into their generic documentation, and then down here at the very bottom where they've got all their methods and functions and stuff, we'll go down here to dates. So I'm in the Appendix B, Expression Utility Objects, and we'll go down here to dates. And I showed you this briefly once upon a time. And so they've got a method, right? Which one is it? This one right here, dates.format. And then you can pass in a format, okay? So we've got that. Now I'm going to cut to the chase in the interest of time, though, and tell you that this actually won't work for us. And the problem is that it is the right thing to do mostly, but it won't work for us. And the reason it won't work is because this function, this method, if you will, dates.format, only understands the old style Java date. So if you'll recall back in the date time lessons that I taught, I didn't spend a whole lot of time on the old style date and time and calendar API because you, for the most part, should try to avoid that if you're writing new code. It's just not as good and it's not as consistent as the current modern date time API, where we're using everything that you've been seeing us use, local dates and zone date times and all of that stuff. However, this library by default does not understand local dates and things of that sort. And so if we were to try to use this method as is, our program would blow up because it would say, I don't know how to format a local date. Now, happily, there is an extension to Thymeleaf that does know how to handle what are called Java 8 datetime API. And so we need to incorporate that extension as a library into our application, and then we will be able to basically do this with one minor change, okay? So let me show you how to do that. And I'm sorry that you got to go through that, but that's just how it works. Okay, so first thing we'll do, we're gonna import a new dependency because this is an additional library that we need to import into our project. And the way we can do that is to go to Gradle. So I will do a Command O and type in Gradle, and I want to search for files, not classes. And I want the, where's it at? The build.gradle file. There it is. Okay, so here I am at the build.gradle file. Now, just for a moment here, I'm going to switch out of presentation mode so that I can use Maven to search for the Gradle dependency that we need here. So let me switch out of presentation for a moment here, and then I will do a Command N to add an additional Gradle dependency. And I think, again, I always forget, on Windows and Linux, I think it's Control Insert. You can try that, right? Add dependency. All right, and then up here, I'm going to search for my dependencies. So I'm going to search for Thymeleaf and also Java 8, because I happen to know that those are some of the keywords that are in the dependency that I'm looking for. And then I will scroll down a little bit. And there it is, Thymeleaf extras Java 8 time. That is the dependency that I want. And by default, this IntelliJ utility for adding additional dependencies and everything will typically display the most recent stable release. Okay, so all I need to do now is just click add, and watch up here when I click add, that line will be added. There it is, right there. Okay, and then I can get rid of that, and now I can switch back into presentation mode so that you can see what I'm doing more easily without me having to do a bunch of editing after the fact to zoom in and zoom out and all of that. It's a lot of work. All right, there we go. Now, I need to actually trigger Gradle though to pull this dependency in. And so to do that, I can come over here to the Gradle tab and select that. And then I can click this little refresh thing here. And so that is triggering Gradle to see that I've added a new dependency and then download that dependency if I didn't already have it. All right. So now I've got that dependency here. So the next step, now I want you to kind of understand how you could figure some of this out for yourself, by the way. So if you actually come over here and just copy like maybe the Java 8 time word there, and then open up a browser and you Google Thymeleaf space, and then that dependency there, and maybe documentation, like so. Now, I happen to know that it's not either of these first two links, but it is in this GitHub link here. So if you click on that, you'll get to see the very, very tiny little bit of documentation that does exist for this. And there's one key thing that you need to be aware of, and that's why I'm showing you this. So down here it says this module adds a temporals object similar to the dates or calendars one in the standard dialect. So what they're saying is if we go back over to Thymeleaf's documentation here, the way that Thymeleaf says you can do this date formatting is by embedding, let me zoom in a bit, is by embedding something like this. Okay, so this is an object and this is a method on that object. So you access that object by using this hashtag dates. So if you want to do these same kinds of things, but for Java 8 datetime API, instead of doing hashtag dates, you would instead do hashtag temporals. Okay, so that's the main difference. Okay, that might not have been super obvious to you, and that's why I wanted to make sure that I pointed that out. And they even show some examples right down here, in fact, which actually looks exactly like what's over here, except instead of dates, it says temporals. All right. Okay, so let's jump back over to the browser now, and then over here, let's jump back over into the template, people.html. And so now all we need to do is modify this. Actually, I guess I should have left either of these open. So the version that we really want is this one right here. I'll zoom in a bit. Temporals.format, where we pass in a temporal, which is our date field, and then we can pass in a format string, just like what we've been using all along pretty much, okay? So down here where we're printing out the date of birth, now we won't need the double curly braces anymore because now we're not letting the formatter from Spring do any formatting for us, okay? We're gonna do the formatting now using Thymeleaf, okay? So I'm gonna get rid of all of that, and now I'm going to basically just copy what I see here, more or less. So they've got a hashtag temporals.format, and then they refer to the date time object. That's what this word temporal means. So ours would be person.dob, followed by a comma, space, you don't need that space, but I'm putting it there, and then a single tick, and I'm just going to put both of the ticks there together, and I'm also going to put this closing parentheses so that I won't forget them. All right, and then inside of here I will do my formatting. So the format string that we were using before was 4 capital M's, meaning we want the month spelled out, followed by 2-digit day, comma, and then 4-digit year. Okay, so that's what we were doing before. All right, so let's come back over here and let's see if that's enough. All right, so I will restart/refresh. Hey, and look at that. So we're back in business now. So we've got our date formatted nicely up here, and we're parsing things properly down here, which is exactly what we wanted, okay? So sorry that was a little bit of a long way around just to get to that little bit of functionality, but sometimes that's just what you've got to do, all right? So let's see here. Let's add a few more records, I suppose. So let me finish editing this record. So let's change this amount again. Maybe we'll make it 100,000, 100, 2, 3, like so. Enter. Okay, so we've got 100 grand now. And then let's add a new person, Jerry Seinfeld. I don't know when Jerry Seinfeld was born. Hey Google, when was Jerry Seinfeld born?
Jerry Seinfeld was born on April 29th, 1954.
April 29, 1954. Wow, he's kind of up there in age a little bit, huh? All right, and J. Seinfeld at NBC.com. Okay, and let's say he has a salary of $2 million. All right, so let's add him. All right, so there's Jerry. All right, and now let's edit Jerry Seinfeld. So we'll select him and click edit. All right, and so now all of our fields populate, including the date of birth now properly. And let's say that now he's no longer with NBC, and now he's at Curb Your Enthusiasm or something. Seinfeld at curb.com, and now his salary is whatever, 3 million, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and return. And very good. So that updated properly. And well, let's check that email address. Yeah, so the email address is at Curb now. So there we have it. So now we've got the ability to add, delete, edit, and list out everybody there. Now we could do a few other tweaks, perhaps, like if we selected one of these people to edit them like this, and then we changed our minds. So, you know, you could have like a cancel button there, and maybe I'd have that button just result in a redirect back to this page again. That would clear everything out right there, right? So that would be kind of an easy way to do that. But yeah, there you have it. We have now implemented a very typical CRUD application, and we've encountered a lot of the types of issues that you would really encounter when doing this type of work, okay? Now, I think I will go ahead and teach a few more techniques along these lines before we close out this section, but this is covering a lot of the core types of scenarios that you might be likely to encounter with this type of web application development, okay? So in the next lesson, we'll take a look at a few of the remaining techniques that I want to share with you, okay? So I'll see you in the next one. Hey guys, thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this content and you'd like to help me out, there are several ways you could do that. First, you can always click the like and subscribe. That'll help me out a lot. Additionally, another way you can help me out is to check the link in the description below. That'll link you to my website where you can find additional courses. And finally, for those of you who might be interested in starting a new career as a professional software developer, I offer a free PDF guide that will detail exactly how you can get started in this field with no college degree and no prior experience. All you need to do is click on the link in the description below. Thanks again, and I'll see you in the next one.